Well, just to officially start then, my name's Gary Robinson. I'm the host of these webinars, these vodcasts, whatever we're calling them these days. And I've been delighted to be involved with Ace Aware Nation for a good number of years now. And not a moment goes by with these events where I don't learn something new. And I think tonight is going to be exactly the same, certainly for me, but for many people in the meeting. So it's great to have you on board. I want to introduce our guests and our very honoured guests. And some of you will know some of them. Some of them will be strangers to us, but I'm sure over the next hour and a half, we'll get to know everybody. Fritzi Horstman is the founder of the Compassion Prison Project in America. And Fritzi, you're with us now. Where are you, Fritzi? Hello, good evening, good morning.
I'm here. I'm calling from Los Angeles. It's so exciting to be here. And I want to shout out to all the men and women in Edinburgh, Polmont, Addywell, and Barlinnie. Just so you know, I'm coming out to visit you all, and I really hope to see you, and I hope you sign up to visit. And this is for you. We're here to talk about you and to talk about how we can transform this prison system.
Fritzi, it is great to see you. Just so I can acclimatize myself in terms of geographical. What time of day is it in LA? Did you say?
Yes, it's 11:19 a.m. and I've had 2 breakfasts already, so I'm ready.
Well, it's great to see you, and we can't wait to see you, of course, on the 1st of June when you visit these bonny shores of ours in Scotland. And I'll come to you in just a moment, Fritzi. Very interested in the work that you do, how it was developed, and certainly, you know, I had the honour of seeing Step Inside the Circle earlier today as I was doing my research, and what a fascinating film. I talk to you more about that. Another of our guests is Natalie Logan-McLean, who's the CEO of Cisco. Natalie, are you with us?
Good evening, Gary.
Hi, Natalie. Great to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay, thanks. I am doing okay. I am trying to be present in the moment, but as you know, trauma is a very difficult conversation to speak about. But I'm very, very excited for the work that we're about to do and the vision that actually James Docherty and Ian Smith had and brought to me and Pauline. So together we've been able to take that vision to Fritzi and create something that's never been done in Scotland. So I am anxious but excited.
Well, you and I, along with some other people who are on the call tonight, had a call on Monday. We had a pre-planning call, and I thought that your honesty and your openness around trauma was absolutely refreshing. So thank you for that. I really, really appreciate it, and I know that the fellow guests do as well. Natalie, I'll come back to you in a second about the work of your organisation. Ian Smith, partner at Keegan Smith Lawyers. Ian, you're with us.
Hi, Gary. I wish I'd worn a bow tie, but I don't own one. But yes. I can borrow one of yours. Nice to see you.
I wore it especially for you, my friend. Ian, how are you doing? What's happening in your world? A lot has happened since we last met in the flesh, as it were, maybe 2 years ago at a conference or at the Ace Aware conference. But you've been doing a tremendous amount of work in terms of trying and working towards reforming the legal system. How's that going? And I know that you've won a number of accolades because of that as well. We're not here to talk about that, of course, but how's that been? How have the past couple of years been for you?
So, like everyone else, the past couple of years have been very odd because of COVID and the pandemic. But the great thing has been being able to reach across the water to people like Fritzi and to meet up with people that you would maybe not have time to meet with by using this medium. So that's been great. James and I, along with some other lawyers and much more creative people than I would ever be, we created a little organisation called Trauma Aware Law, and we've sort of pushed and pulled at various people in the law to recognise trauma, and it's gaining some traction. In January, they created new guidelines for young people under 25, where in every single case involving someone who's under 25 in whichever court, High Court, Sheriff Court or Justice of the Peace Court, they must take into account trauma, and that's been a big breakthrough. And today, the Judicial Institute and the judges advised that one of the first people to get an accredited Law Society course, a guy called John Scott QC, who Suzanne has spoken with and James has spoken with in different ways, has been appointed as a High Court judge. So for me, there's things happening in the law. It's usually very slow. It's happening a lot quicker than I thought it would. So great to change things in prison, but equally, before it all starts, it'd be great to change things in education. Law is just part of the society, and it's great to be involved in the change. So thanks for having me along.
Ian, great to see you, and congratulations on that. And somebody who I now class as a friend, absolutely. I just think he is the bee's knees. I've got to be careful on my language as we're broadcasting live. But James Doherty from the Violence Reduction Unit. Good evening to you, James.
Gary, how you doing, my friend? Feelings mutual.
It's great to see you. Great to see you. I suppose a similar question to Ian. I mean, we've not seen each other really in the flesh like a lot of people for a couple of years. How's it been for you since we last met at that wonderful conference that you hosted with Gabor Mate?
All good, mate. Still walking with the wounded and watching miracles every day.
Brilliant. Succinct as always. I like that. I like that, James. Right, let's go to Fritzi. Fritzi, once again, welcome to Scotland. Tell the collective a little bit about your organisation and the work that it does in the States.
Our mission at Compassion Prison Project is to transform and to bring. Sorry, I'm nervous. I'm very nervous suddenly. Just knowing I'm talking to people in prison, I'm nervous. Our mission is to create trauma-informed prisons and communities in the US, in Scotland, throughout the world. When an institution or a community is trauma-informed, that means they're human-informed. That means they look at the human side instead of what's been done, the harm that's been caused. A harm has been caused, but people are perfect. People are divine. They've done a mistake, but that doesn't mean we take away their humanity. And what we're doing is to bring awareness about adverse childhood experiences, that what happened to us as children has impacted the way we behave as adults. That's true as far as I'm concerned as well. I have 8 adverse childhood experiences, and that has impacted my behavior. And once I became aware of what happened to me as a child and how it affected my behavior, I started healing, and my brain, the injury that was in my brain from the trauma began to heal. And I know that that's possible for everyone in our society. And I know that's possible for everyone in prison. And our mission is to bring this work, this awareness to everyone living and working in prison. This is for the officers and the staff as well, because they're in a traumatic environment and they're affected by what happens when you're living with people that are traumatized.
So you've been working in this area since 2019, I think, from memory from the research, which is an incredibly short amount of time, particularly when you think what the world's been through in terms of COVID and so on. How has the way that we've been living over the past couple of years impacted your work and the message that you want to get across?
Well, just first of all, just to talk about what COVID has done to our own societal mental health. If you look at people, how they're behaving on planes, it's very similar to people that are in fierce incarceration like we're experiencing in the United States. Isolation is not good for the brain. And that's what we do to people in prison, is we isolate them. And what we are communal creatures, and we need to be in society. And so what's happened in COVID is prisons are a microcosm of what has happened in our society, except in prisons, you'd be in your bathroom for the entire 2 years instead of being able to roam around your house. So imagine being in your bathroom for the next 2 years of your life, how that would impact your mental health. And that's what we have to start thinking about, is isolation is the worst thing for a person's mental health. True, it's happening with social media as well. It also isolates us. But what happened with COVID was a blessing for us. We didn't get to visit prisons, but we started creating a curriculum called Trauma Talks. It's a 12-part curriculum educating the men and women living in prison about childhood trauma and what it does to the brain, body, and spirit. And also ways to heal and ways to get busy once you know that you're you're a perfect, wonderful human being that deserves opportunities and possibilities like the rest of us. Just because you made a crime does not mean you're not human anymore, and that you don't matter anymore. And now that we know this, now that we matter, all of us matter, 100% of society matters, how are we going to participate in giving back and finding purpose for our lives? Everyone in prison needs purpose. Everyone in society needs purpose. It's what gets us up in the morning. And boy, it gets me up in the morning. That's all I can think about, is how we can change and transform our prison system and our society.
And Fritzi, back in 2019, and maybe prior to then, what were the steps or the elements that gave you this light bulb moment about what needs to happen in terms of people in prison and compassion? Was there a certain moment? Was there something that happened that was really, really impactful for you to make this decision and to go on the course of action that you're currently taking?
What happened is I read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, and I learned my behavior wasn't who I was. I walked into a prison a month later, and I met 100 men that I saw their behavior wasn't who they were. And I left that day, after I cried all day for what we were doing to people in prison. I left that day determined, and I knew it was my obligation to bring this information to the rest of the world so we can change this paradigm. Because when does a person become a non-human? When they commit a crime, when they're abused as children? We have to really think about what we've done, starting from the crib to people that are traumatized, and to continue the procedures of traumatization and domination in prison does not alleviate the suffering and bring healing. So the minute I walked out of that prison that day, I said, this is it. I'm obligated to change this prison system. And I don't know why I've taken it on myself. A lot of other people have taken it on, but that's what we're going to do.
Later in the conversation, I want to talk about Step Inside the Circle, which I thought was the 5 minutes that I saw was incredibly impactful. And you had people there who were deeply moved about the whole experience and about going through the ACEs check, if you like, and getting people to step into the circle. I thought incredibly impactful. And there was one chap I remember who said it was the best day he'd ever had. I think words to that effect. And so we'll talk about that in just a second. But Fritz, it's great to have you here. Thank you. Natalie, if I could come to you, could you tell me a little bit about the work of Cisco, please?
Hi, Gary. So Cisco is what we would like to call the bridge between prison and the community. Back in 2015, I had supported the development of some recovery communities in East Dunbartonshire, and the Scottish Prison Service, Neil Fraser, who was working in Berlin at the time, had attended a couple of different places because he wanted to make something different happen within Berlin. He was sick of the status quo and he wanted something radical. So he then approached me and asked, would I be able to develop a similar model? To which I told him yes, but the prison service would have to look at me challenging boundaries, not having prison officers in the room, lots and lots of different elements. And please be reminded that prisons have to be risk averse for a number of reasons. So some of the things that I was asking were very unrealistic, but they allowed me to do them because they trusted in the model that we had created. So what we understand, and not everyone in Scotland or the UK or the world understands yet, is it's not addiction versus mental health. This is about a dual diagnosis. This is about treating both conditions together. So if you've had addiction and mental health problems, you'll have disadvantaged family backgrounds, defragmented relationships with your families. You will come from poverty and disadvantage. There will be scores of 8 and higher on adverse childhood experiences. So what we wanted to create was a model that looked at what would make someone whole again. And in order to do that, we spoke to the prisoners in HMP Berlin and we got their view. And there's actually one of them on tonight. And I'm going to, I would like to say thank you to Sean Toll, who's actually in the audience, because him and Neil Fraser were two of the people that helped us develop an outstanding model for prisoners, delivered by prisoners. So it was about empowering prisoners to deliver the Recovery Cafe, to facilitate the space, to decide who they wanted to come up every week, what services they wanted and what services would benefit them. And what happens is when you give people power back to take control and actually make choices, they actually make really good choices, because in prison they don't get the opportunity. They get told when to eat, when to sleep, when they're locked up. You know, there's routines, there's structures in place. We wanted to offer something completely different, where we were going in and saying, okay, in an ideal world, what would prevent you ever returning to prison? And then they're allowed to create a care plan based on their needs. So it's not about us ticking boxes based on funding outcomes. This is about person before policy at all times, Gary. And that's why the model works, and that's why our outcomes have been outstanding.
Were there any particular challenges in the early days of putting everything together? And were the challenges with people in prison, or was it particularly with the staff? Where did you find, if any major challenges with getting this concept across?
With anything new, Gary, there's always going to be challenges, and it doesn't matter what business you're in. The challenges initially going in were getting the prisoners actually to trust me, to trust that I wasn't there to harm them, to trust that I was there to support them. The first thing that we do as soon as we go in a room is we take the badge off, we wear jeans, we wear training shoes, we try and wear the same clothes as prisoners, because we don't want to create a them and us. The focus of the work we do when we go in is try and teach the men in prison that, please bear in mind, the guy that's locking you up at night has a wife and children. He's only here to do a job. Yes, there is prison officers that are very resistant to this work because they've been used to a certain structure. They've been used to a certain work pattern for a number of years, but there's also officers that are really driving forward a new recovery agenda. They're looking at mental health. I mean, Stephen McCann and David Abernethy are absolutely doing fantastic work in Edinburgh. And then you've got Mark Cowie and his team at Addywell doing fantastic work. Berlin have been behind this since 2015, so they've really bought into it for a long time. Pullman, we've never worked with young offenders before, so this will be the first time that we look at how we can support the young offenders to get better, because the reality is, if we don't contain this while these kids are young, then they're going to go into adult prisons. So we need to be going into nurseries, we need to be going into schools. There needs to be more prevention work, because if we had more prevention work, I could go and work in ASDA, wouldn't be hyper stressed every day, and could go home to my husband and 2 children on a pink fluffy cloud, but that's not the reality. Thankfully, the Scottish Prison Service are now recognising a real need for lived experience. They're really looking at trauma in a new light, and they're opening their establishments to try new things. That's radical, Gary. That is radical, it's brave, it's groundbreaking, and I have absolutely nothing but admiration for the prison officers and the governors that are allowing us into their ground to create this change, because it must be difficult for establishments, right?
I noticed from the messaging that we've got people all over. Somebody's just sent a note through. They're watching us in France tonight. Where are we, Natalie, in terms of the UK? So if you look at England, Northern Ireland, you look at Wales, is Scotland leading the way? Is there more work to be done, in your opinion? Where do we sit?
I'm not saying this because I'm Scottish and biased. I'm saying this because I believe it's true. I believe that Scotland will lead with this, and I believe we are leading with this. I believe there's already small pockets of changes that's happening within the prison establishments that general population don't get to hear about, because all the general population think is they're the bad guys, they're in jail because they've done something wrong. They're not interested about the therapeutic work being done, but the prison service, they're opening their doors to new things because they're obviously sick of the same cycle. They're sick of seeing the same faces. Unfortunately, the great governors that we have that are making these changes are going to be retiring soon, so I just hope they've got good guys underneath them, because we need them to be driving the change, Gary. But I do believe that Scotland are leading the way with this.
Brilliant. Wonderful. Ian Smith, this must be music to your ears.
It is music to my ears. I'll just counter that in a negative way. I know it's a really positive thing having Fritzi over, but just before we get too ahead of ourselves, Scotland has the highest drugs deaths in the world. Scotland has the highest prison rate in Western Europe. So there is loads of scope for us to do a whole load better. But the work Natalie is doing, the work that Fritzi does is fabulous. And in my world, in the criminal justice system, we've got to stop seeing people who are addicted to substances as junkies. We've got to stop seeing alkies. These are people who are struggling, who have been hurt and are ready and wanting to heal. So if we can stop the narrative about punishment and retribution and move on to rehabilitation and healing, we will have a much better justice system. We won't have a big prison system, because when we start treating people properly, they will respond better. But at the moment, judges and the system is focused on how people will change, when in fact it's a system, it's us, it's the professionals. If we change, people will change, because we won't treat them badly. We won't treat them like dirt. We won't see kids in care floating like little ghosts from the care system to the justice system and then the prison system. And as going later on, how did that happen? We know how it happens. We've got to prevent it. That's what should happen. So, and we're doing that as a society. We've got lots of great things going on. 2018, we had the ACE Aware Nation brought over Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, and she told us all about the science of trauma. And then in 2019, again, the ACE Aware Nation and Kim and James brought over Gabor Mate. So we had the guru of trauma. And now right before us in this room, we have Fritzi Horstman, who I believe is, what does a trauma-informed, trauma-responsive person look like? Well, she's here. She's here in Scotland with Natalie and James and all the other, Sean and all the other people I know on this call, the people that do things. How do we respond? Well, we've got a little army of people who are doing that right now. So this is a great thing. We've got the conference on the 1st of June where we'll hear Fritzi, and Fritzi's going to be in 4 prisons. This is going to be revolutionary, I hope, but it will take us all to change. We don't wait for people in prison to change. We've got to change what we do and to see people and see their heart.
James Doherty, if I could come to you, please, James, if I may. How do we change the hearts and minds of the public? Because, you know, I imagine that the majority of people on this call tonight have a vested interest in being on this call, quite clearly. But what about the people who aren't on the call? What about the people who have been subject to crime? How do we change their positioning on thinking about prison being a punishment and not a rehabilitation?
Yeah, well, I think it was either Vincent Felitti or Dr. Anger said that we need to get this information to the general public and allow them to invent wise actions. So in that statement, he was basically saying that he was basically pointing to something that's a part of every human being, and that's compassion. And I think compassion's a byproduct of understanding human suffering. So the general public don't understand that who we contain in prison is basically we're warehousing human suffering, and we wonder why they're not getting better, because we put them in high octane, highly stressed environments, and when you're highly stressed, you've not got as large an access to the cortex that we take for granted. So we sit here, we're in our cortex, depending on how stressed you are, and we take that for granted, that we think that every human being is in the cortex and accessing free will and choice over every decision they make over their life, and don't realise that who we put in prison are basically people who spent longer as a victim than they ever did as a perpetrator. And we punish them in instalments all their life by things like social inclusion, which is prison. But the social inclusion started young. So if you look at the research, these people in prison, were excluded from school, they were excluded from their peer groups. A lot of them come through the care system. They were excluded from the larger psychosocial support of the community. And I think a big part of no understanding their plight is because we don't understand the trauma they're in. And if people really, really understood the pain that is in people in prison, then they would walk through the street with tears in their eyes at what human beings have to endure and that what they walk past every day. And I think that's why we need to get this information to everybody. And I think that's why people like Fritzi do what they do, because we need to widen the circle of compassion, because it takes a community to return people to themselves. And that's basically ultimately what my work is about trying to return people to themselves, the person they were supposed to be before the trauma, the drugs, the prisons get their hooks into them, so that they can come back to the community and be the contributing, beautiful human being that they are. Like, I was in a prison, Gary, last week, and I says to every one of them, "You're not the worst thing you've ever done." And that kind of got their attention. And then I says, "Your true nature's compassion." And the reason I know that is because if I had to stop breathing and fall on the floor, every single one of you in this room would try and help me, wouldn't you? And they all nodded in agreement. That's compassion. So that's what we're trying to get people, is to try to get people that, I go to the gym, Gary, right, and see the hard skin that's on my hands. The hard skin is because I need to protect, my hands need to protect themselves against a harsh environment. So that's a conditioning that takes place. So if we're looking at people in prison as hardened criminals, then what we need to ask is, what kind of environment were they hardening themselves against? And it's the same for the prison staff, because they're a reflection of that. They're hardening themselves against the hardening that they see in that environment. So everybody ends up like two opposite ends of a magnet and wondering why there's no connection, because they're basically mirror images of each other. And it's very hard for a prison warden to recognise that I'm being in a conditioned response, just like the people in this prisoner. But behind that hardness is the softness, and that's where we're trying to get to. And that's our true nature as human beings.
Do we give the prison staff enough support, enough training? Do we give them enough leeway for them to understand what this discussion is about tonight? Or could we do more? I want to say we. I suppose I'm talking about us as a community. But you know, what can we do to support the prison staff who are supporting the prisoners?
First of all, I think there needs to be compassion for the prison staff as well, because the prison staff, so whether a lot of people know this or not, statutory services have got one of the highest rates of sick leave in the country. And people talk about vicarious trauma and how they're dealing with the ubiquitous slow drip stress every day, of dealing with people who are navigating trauma. But the greater aspect of vicarious trauma is that your unresolved trauma got triggered. It wasn't that other people traumatised you, it was that they brought up some stuff in you that you need to heal. And that can happen at any stage in your life. And I think there's too much a burden placed on the prison staff, because it's too big a job for them. And that's why we need to recognise that it takes a community to return people to themselves. To expect the prison system just to carry the load of rehabilitation is delusional on our part, because the environment, for a start, when you look at a prison environment, it's very hard to foster the rehabilitation context that's needed in a highly stressed environment. But prison staff will tell you, Gary, like the hardest thing that we've got to do in a day is get people fed, get them to their visits, get their meal, and all the other programs and the therapeutic work that we know that in order to create a therapeutic community, it needs to start with safety. so that they can come out the fight or flight part of their brain into the cortex, so they can access the place of healing that's possible for everybody. So I think it's not just about compassion for the prisoners, it's everybody, it's the prison staff as well, and recognise that they may be navigating their own trauma, and plus the expectation that's placed on them is unrealistic. So it's recognising that the prison needs to allow community to come in and create the conditions for healing.
Fritzi, listening to our guests on this side of the pond, do some of the stories that you're hearing tonight resonate with you? Are you going, yeah, do you know what, same here?
Absolutely, probably more so because we're in California, it's much more punitive, and in the United States. What I did want to respond to in one of your questions to James is prisons are a trauma response. The reason we have prisons is because we want to get back at the person who's done the harm. And if we realize that we're coming from our fight or flight instincts when we create prisons, instead of from our cortex, if we came from our cortex, we'd say, oh my gosh, what happened to the person that just got incarcerated? What happened to him or her? What happened? And you start with that question and you're in a different place in your brain. And so prisons need to come into their cortex, really, basically. And as a society, we need to come into our cortex because we're all, I've heard people say things like, yeah, they get what they deserve. But how many of us have committed a crime? How many of us, it's hypocrisy that just because you get arrested and put in prison, that now you're not subject to human rights. But I'm so excited to be visiting Scotland because Scotland is taking giant steps towards humanity and towards trauma-informed care. And it could be an example for the rest of the world if we get this right. And I say we because I'm highly invested in the outcomes of 8,000 people living in prison in Scotland. Remember, that's 2.5 prisons in California. We have 35 prisons in California. There's 100,000 people in California right now living in prison. And 1.8 to 1.9 million people in the United States living in prison. We have more than our work cut out for us, but we need examples. And so I'm coming to Scotland ready to make it right. And so I hope every person in Addywell, Palmont, Barlinnie, and Edinburgh are listening to this and saying, she's coming. What are we going to do? Let's get ready for her. Let's show up and let's find out what she's here to talk about, because what I'm here to talk about is that you matter. And I'm here to talk about that we need you. We need your energy. We need your inspiration. We need your brilliance. And you can do that from while you're healing in prison. And we also need for the officers and the governors and the people in the administrations of prisons to also get help and to also understand that we all have to get to our cortex. That's where solutions and transformation occurs.
Let's focus on some of the practicalities of that. So, we know that change can take an awful long time, Fritzi, particularly in the worlds that we're speaking about around ACEs and so on. But if we were to start to break down the walls of the prisons, what would be the alternative? What would rehabilitation look like if we're taking somebody out of their cell for however many hours a day that is? What's the process? Are we involving the community? I'm just really keen on what the practical solutions are as opposed to prison.
First off, I just want to say it doesn't have to take a long time. Rome wasn't built in a day, but prisons don't have to be like they are, for the next 10 years. Why can't this all change in the next couple of months? Seriously, the one thing that I've seen, and I've talked with tons of therapists, trauma experts and trauma therapists, is people in prison need to be in community. The thing about prison is the isolation nature. And so they need to be out of their cells in groups all the time. And I'm worried about the officers having to make them go into groups every day, but they need to be in groups. Why? Because when they were children, they didn't get the serve in return. So The serve and return is when the mother's like goo goo gaga and the baby's like, the baby smiles and peekaboo, all those things are serve and return. And I'm sure a lot of the people in prison had some of that, but they needed a whole lot more of it. They needed hours and hours and hours of it. And the reason, and I didn't get as much of it as I needed as well as a child, because my mother was traumatized. So the thing is, we need that serve and return from other people, sitting in groups, changing our brains and learning that being with people is a safe environment. That's the thing that people in prison don't get. It's not in their body. It's not, their body is saying, I'm in a dangerous situation. I've got to be on guard. And by sitting in circles that are safe, that are facilitated, that are empathetic and compassionate, it changes the brain and it begins the healing in the brain. That's what we do. That's what we need. But we need that, I would argue, in our society as well. We all have injured brains. We're all in fight or flight to some extent. I mean, just when my dog pulls me on the leash, I get into fight or flight. And I see it, but the thing is to see it and to bring awareness. And awareness is the key. And it's a spiritual thing as well, because all the spiritual teachers say you have to be aware of your thoughts. And so this is like coming from a different angle, but it's the same angle. Awareness is awareness. I don't care if it's about trauma or your thoughts or who you are, but we have to look at the mechanics of this brain that we have that's going 24/7, saying this person's going to kill me, saying this person's bad, instead of saying, oh my God, look how beautiful that man is. Oh my God, look at that child. Oh my God, look at that guy in Addywell who has the most beautiful smile and the most potential I've ever seen. So you change that conversation, you change the brain, you change the world. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. We're changing our brains. The brain is injured. It's the legacy of trauma and abuse and violence. If we look at Scotland, what the Scots have been through for centuries, that gets passed down centuries after centuries. The trauma and the alcohol and the addiction, and the addiction is a solution to trauma. We can't blame anyone for doing that. The thing is, there are other solutions, which is, yoga and getting into your body and breathing and feeling. It's scary to feel though. And so it has to be safe to feel. That's the thing. And that's the opportunity for prisons, but it's also the opportunity for schools. If we can intervene at 5 years old, 2 years old, where someone is acting out, guess what? That's a trauma response, probably. So we have, when we become trauma aware throughout our society, every person can see someone. Instead, you see a homeless person, what you're seeing is a trauma response, right? Or you see someone getting arrested, that's a trauma response. A crime is a trauma response. And it's really very simple, but we want to be right in our society, right? Which is also another trauma response. We want to be right. They did something bad. We have to punish them. I'm right about this. And if you look at it, righteousness is violence, right? And so when we break down the righteousness and we forgive, so that's the other piece, is big time forgiveness for everything, forgiveness for the way the prisons were, forgiveness for what we've done, forgiveness for what we probably will do again. But forgiveness for everyone who's committed a crime, and forgiveness for the crimes we've committed on the people who have committed crimes. It's big time forgiveness. And once we get to that place, the righteousness melts. It's about melting our righteousness and our need to be right and our need to be perfect and our need to be these puritanical beings that, I don't know where this Puritanism came from, but it's destroying everything. And who said we have to be perfect and austere and, you have to live by this rule? What it creates is more violence. It's just another level of violence that doesn't show up. So
how do we square the circle though, Fritzi, with this? And forgive me for being blunt here, but if I've experienced a crime, or say my car's been broken into, or I've been burgled, or my brother's been killed, or my sister's been raped, God forbid, how do you persuade me to forgive? And where does that compassion come from? I would find it really difficult to find that compassion really deep down. How do we get over? That's a massive hurdle for us, isn't it?
Well, again, it doesn't have to be a massive hurdle. These are the things we say that they're going to be that way, and then they are so. So I'm going to be saying we look compassionately and we get into our cortex. But you're absolutely right. I'm not condoning anything anyone has ever done in prison. But what we need, and there are victims here, and they need just as much help and healing as what I'm bringing to prison. So please don't ever interpret what I say as being anything but remorseful about what has been done. As James said, though, people who commit crimes were victims first, and they weren't taken care of. And so we have to keep that in our view. But forgiveness is not about, forgiveness is a spiritual act, and it is not about the other person. It's not about really forgiving the other person. It's about forgiving the other person so that you can move on in your life, so you can move into another level of being. Because when you're in that harboring of anger and righteousness and need for justice and retribution, you're in a very, very dehumanized place. And it's not only a dehumanized place about the person who committed the crime, it's a dehumanized place inside yourself. You have systematically destroyed your innards. You have systematically destroyed who you are in this world. And so it's about a spiritual transformation. It's not about, it's forgiveness for the person who committed the crime, but it's forgiveness for all the crimes you've committed, for everything that's been done to you. Everything, it's because we're holding on so hard, nothing can happen anymore. We've destroyed our planet. We've destroyed our teenagers. You know, they're all lost in trying to escape now. So something's got to give. And the thing that has to give is our own harsh, you know, the hardness that that James is talking about. This hardness is everywhere. And it's the softening of our society and the softening of our hearts. That's what's needed to save our planet, to save our species. And it's not going to come from being right. It's not going to come from punishing anyone.
Natalie, if I could come to you again, if I may, Natalie, we were talking about, you know, if prison walls were coming down, and it doesn't have to take a long time, and I appreciate that, you know, Fritzi, you know, we can move on this. In your experience, Natalie, is that relationship between somebody who's coming out of prison and the community, have you seen some transformational work in that area?
There was actually some fantastic work that was done a number of years ago, Gary, and it was actually done by the Scottish Prison Service, who created a through care system. It worked absolutely beautifully. I had a number of clients that attended our service that were part of that through care, and it was a consistent through care service. So this is the problem. People will say they provide prison through care or prison after care, and they have a 99% success rate. But when you ask them, can you break down what the 99% success rate was, how many people didn't reoffend, how many people, you know, stopped using illicit drugs, how many people abstained, they can't give you a clear answer. And what happened was, for whatever reason, they stopped that through care service at the SPS, and there's different services that will pick it up, but it's not good enough. That's where the gap is. The gap is between the prison do a fantastic job, and they will offer opportunities to look at life skills, to look at holistic, looking at your drug and alcohol problems. You'll get an opportunity to look at skills by going into education. We can do fantastic work in prison. We can reduce people using illicit drugs. We can reduce them on their prescribed medication. We can start to rebuild relationships with their family. The issue is the bit in the middle, when they leave prison going into the community. And a perfect example of this is, and he's on the call and he asked me not to name him, but I am, because I think it's very important. There's a guy, Rab, on this call, he's on tonight, who was in prison for 27 years. Now, he got a 9-year sentence in 1994 and spent 27 years caught in the prison system simply because he picked up drugs while he was in prison, because he was also traumatized by his crime. And the reality is, he was abandoned by a system. He was abandoned. No one, I asked them, during your time in prison, did anyone come and ask you, what happened to you? Are you okay after your crime? Like, we forget that the men that I certainly work with, 85% of them, when they commit their crime, they're under the influence of alcohol or drugs. So they wake up in a jail cell going, shit, what did I do? They don't even know. So the reality is they already have that trauma. We know they're scoring high on the races. Then we're putting them into a traumatized environment. If you have ever been in prison, the smell of prison alone sets off so much in my inner cortex, because my experience as a child is being in prison environments. That's my experience. So it heightens everything in my brain. But this guy that I'm talking about, Rab, there was nothing for him when he got out. If we weren't there, there would have been nothing, because he went to a tribunal. We fought his case for 4 years. His lawyer, James Smith, was fantastic. He went to a tribunal. No one knew that he was going to be released. And they decided on that day, after 27 years, you're getting out tomorrow. Now, this is someone that doesn't know how to work a mobile phone, has not been on public transport, does not know that society as we know it is getting out in the middle of a pandemic. And all the prison knew what to say is, do you need a bus pass to get home? Now, this is a guy that's not been in society. So had we not been there to pick up that through care, that aftercare, the reality is he would have probably returned, because at the bottom of Berlin prison, there's an off license. So he wouldn't have been able to function during a pandemic, off license, not knowing what to do. So the reality is we're not doing enough in the bit in between, Gary. There's great stuff going on in prison. There's fantastic work being done in the community. It's the bit in the middle. We need to link up when these guys need to be held by the hand. If the brain is developed by the age of 5, that's what you're looking at. Every man and woman inside the walls. I don't see a grown man. I see a 5-year-old child that is so harmed and so hurt and bleeding out, really, really bleeding out. So we need to hold these individuals by the hand when they're released and care for them and love them and show them compassion and empathy. And most importantly, show them that they can trust us. We're not there to harm them as much as they already have. My body's the way James explained his hand. That's the whole inside of my body with the trauma I've endured. But the reality is, if I've scored 10 on an ACEs questionnaire, dragged myself through mud to get into recovery, and I'm still in this process of healing, and yet at times it can be so sore. If I can do that as a female, I believe everybody is strong enough to do that, Gary. Everybody in society, whether you're in prison or whether you're in general population. Do you know why? Because we all deserve to have peace of mind. We should all be able to sleep at night with nothing in our conscience but peace.
Gosh, Natalie, you know what? Wow, that's a really strong statement. I'm just thinking there as you were describing Rab's story, and that's just one story in 8,000 that we clearly have. And if your organisation wasn't there, so there must be people falling through the cracks, because you can't be there for everybody. Whose, I say, responsibility is it? Is it a governmental thing, Natalie? Is it about more money? Is it about more understanding? Would we as a nation, if we took the approach that your organisation takes, would we save money ultimately and be more effective in terms of rehabilitation? Who's going to fill that gap, do you think, or who do you suggest does that?
The change absolutely has to be radical, Gary. The reality is, this needs to be from the top down. This needs to be more prevention work going into schools and nurseries. This needs to also look at the academics. So in university, if you're going to be a teacher, you should know about trauma. If you're going to be a lawyer, you should know about trauma. If you're going to be a prison officer, you should know. It doesn't matter what field of work that you're going into. If you're going to be a manager or a leader, you should have a comprehensive understanding of trauma, because we have all endured something. Everyone that is on this tonight will at least score 1 on an ACEs questionnaire, at least score 1, everyone that is on this.
Wow. Ian, the change that excuse me you're driving through, in the in the legal world, and we've been surprised at how quickly in certain areas that's happened. Are you seeing a real change with the judiciary? Are they listening to you, or have we still got judges who are still, dyed in the wool?
Yeah, there's a lot of it. So I think even now, 4 years on, when I first understood about trauma, about how I first properly saw my clients for the first time, I still sound like a weirdo, because when I talk about trauma and about compassion for my clients and showing empathy, presiding with kindness, they look at me as if I've got two heads. But that's changing bit by bit. They've brought in brilliant guidelines for all the judges, but there's not been any comprehensive training for judges, firstly making them aware about trauma, and then suggesting to them how they could be responsive towards trauma. We don't have massive services, so we're spending millions, tens of millions of pounds building super prisons, bigger, better prisons, rather than spending tens of millions of pounds on rehabilitation, on therapy, on things that can improve the person's life. Now, this is not about a soft and hard approach to justice, it's a smart approach, because what we're talking about, when you were mentioning about victims before, A, a lot of the people I deal with are victims, but B, if you're a victim, I would presume you wouldn't want anyone else to be a victim. So longer term, if you can prevent harm by going to the root of the problem, not the alcohol or drugs, but the trauma, and you can help people on that recovery and healing journey, you're going to have less victims. So this is not an offender's agenda. This is a trauma aware and trauma responsive, to be kind towards people who we think are unkind. It's very hard to do, but that's what we need to do. And it's only just starting, but I really have great hopes about the system changing. But the system is us. It takes us to do it. So even if it's a wee voice, I don't want to sound like I am unusual. I don't want to stand out in the crowd of lawyers. I want every lawyer in Scotland, every judge in Scotland to be trauma aware and trauma responsive. I want to be completely mundane. That's the dream.
And are you're far from mundane. I was about to say, are you getting there with your colleagues? And it sounds that it's slowly catchy monkey a wee bit. It's not. I mean, there's change happening, but could it be quicker?
Well, as I say, they've created guidelines which are amazing. So anyone under 25, the lawyer should be aware, by asking the questions of what happened to you, or seeing in social work reports or looked after care reports, or being aware of a GP report, that this person has certain issues. So immediately, if it's apparent someone has addiction issues, underneath that addiction is trauma. So immediately you're able to use a narrative to a judge. So that's happening right now. So every lawyer in Scotland needs to be aware of it. My view is, why should a 50-year-old heroin addict not have levels of compassion, that we don't give up on that person, because recovery is possible, in my view, for everyone. And yet we've made the cutoff age 25. That's to do with the malleable brain. But for me, I look at people now who are older and who want help, and the help's not there. So we've got huge amounts of work. We're so focused on the damage that people do that we forget the damage that has been done to them. And that's hugely important.
James, how's the work of the violence reduction unit doing at the moment? Is it still going from strength to strength based on the work that ACE Aware Nation continues to do? Are we still learning?
Yeah, we as an organisation are always learning. That I think that's what makes us a great organisation to partnership with and to work with, because we're always open-minded and willing to be open to new paradigms and ways of doing stuff. And that, I think that's why I've stood the test of time, because they allow us to innovate and discard old ideas for new ones. And that's what the work needs to be about, because if you continually rely on the old way of doing things, then you're always going to get the same results. And that's the thing about the way the people that built the system knew what they were doing because it stood the test of time. And a paradigm isn't very open to getting new information or shifting to a new way of doing stuff, because it's not because they're selfish or they don't care. I think it's just because that's the way they've always done it. And I think when we come along with new information, we need to create this, create the conditions where people can welcome the relational support and create the environments that people need to fulfill healthy development. And I always like, I mean, the cortex are saying fully developed here, not fully developed here 25. I was 27 when I went into therapy, and the epiphany I had in therapy was like, oh my God, if this is true for me, how true is it for other people? I need to let people know about this trauma. And all it was for me was the EMDR therapist gave me Dan Siegel's hand model of flipping your lid. And I don't know about any use, but I've flipped my lid a few times. But the thing about flipping your lid is when you're in trauma, your lid can get flipped and jammed on. So you just stay vibrating in this high octane state. The best way to describe it is like I was like a meerkat if I was a wee boy, always scanning the environment and always checking for safety. And I was unconscious. I wasn't even aware that I was doing it. So we're psychoeducating people in the central nervous system and making them aware of that stuff, Gary. It's like Fritzi was saying earlier on, you start to access the part of you that says, I'm not the worst thing I've ever done. Because, and another throwaway statement the therapist says to me was that hurt people. And I sat in my bedroom that night, and after that therapy session with tears in my eyes, thinking that all the people had hurt my life, and that I was hurting people because it was coming from a place of hurt. And it's why I use the statement that I never ever harmed anybody for a place of wickedness. It was for a place of woundedness. And that when we can heal the wound, then healed people can help people as well. And that's the challenge. The real challenge is, how do we create the conditions and provide the relationships that return people to themselves? It's as simple as that, Gary. And people get scared because of the complexity of the word trauma, or it'll strike up. Before people come in here, they've got a concept, a trauma before they've even come into learning about it. And I thought I knew what trauma. I thought trauma was what happened when you went to war. I didn't know that my house was a war zone growing up. I didn't know my war zone was the house, and that I was growing up in an environment with unpredictable relationships. I know I've kind of veered off the question, but I think my experience is very important in this arena, because if we're going to work with trauma survivors, we need to get them to a place where they recognise that their past can be their best asset, that it's not something they should be running for all their life, that it's something they can use in the service of other people. And that happened to me through a priest who was in, funnily enough, and I never ever thought priests could be alcoholics. He was in treatment as well in addressing his trauma. And he says to me, you know, you can use your experience to help people, don't you, James? And that's that thing Fritzi was talking about. See, that serve and return. We are creatures of reciprocation. We need social feedback all the time. And the social feedback I was getting that returned me in myself was for other survivors and the wider community. So when people say to me, oh, you must have this great inner strength that made you want to turn your life around, I said, no, there was no more inner strength in me at that moment than there is in any prisoner in a prison estate. What returned me to myself was people loved me until I was able to love myself. It was that social feedback where I recognised there was aspects of me that were really worth something. And that's how we grow.
And James, do you think, with everything that you've been through and your experience, can it just take one person to change a life? So you talked about the priests, for instance, but I know there were, from what you've been saying tonight, there were other people involved in getting you to be the human that you are today, which is a beautifully compassionate person. Absolutely. And we all have our ups and downs. I'm absolutely sure. But can it just take one person, the power of one person, to change somebody's life?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So here's how it started for me. My cousin was in treatment, and he broke from the treatment's protocol of part of the treatment modality is you need to keep, they call it clean company, as in stay away from people who are active in addiction when you're getting out for the weekend for this treatment centre. And he broke for that, and which is what because love always knows when to break the rules, right? And he visited my home and told me, and Fritzi will get this, and other survivors will get this as well. One of the adaptations of trauma is self-reliance. Where I was that stoic, right? I call it Frank Sinatra syndrome. I'll do it my way. And it's that thing about I'm not letting anybody help me. I got myself into it. I'll get myself out it. So I was so averse to any form of social support that I was just, everybody was, the therapist said I was like a porcupine. I just pointed all my spines at people and kept them over there. And he came to me and says, James, you need to go into treatment. You need to look at the trauma you've been through. You've had it a lot worse than me. It's too big a job for you to do yourself, pal. It's too big a job. And he was that one person I looked at and I saw the change in him. Like just physically, his whole way of being had shifted. And that started my journey into therapy, and then getting a proper diagnosis. I didn't know I was traumatised. I didn't know that my painkiller addiction was an attempt at a solution. I had no idea. I just thought it was a shame and disgrace. And that process started my journey to where I'm all the day, Gary. Anybody that kind of knows my life experience, like I shouldn't be here. And that's why I know that you can't write any human being off at any stage of the journey, because the brain's capacity to heal is remarkable, but it can't heal in isolation. It can only heal in relationship. And that's my experience, that if it wasn't for the relationships, Gary, I wouldn't have made it. So I've got nothing but gratitude for the people who helped me and still help me to this day.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Fritzi, if I can come back to you, a couple of things I want to speak to you about. I want to talk to you about your up and coming visit to Scotland on June the 1st. But I'm also keen to explore a little bit more about your film, Step Inside the Circle. And I'm sure that quite a number of people on this video conference tonight will have seen it. Some people may not have done. Could you just give me a little bit of background as to what that's about and how it came about? Because I thought it was a fantastic piece of work, absolutely fantastic.
Thank you so much. It's called the Compassion Trauma Circle, and everyone stands in a circle, and for each adverse childhood experience that we've experienced, we take a step inside the circle. And I will have taken I take 8 steps when I do the circle. And what happens in that circle is people see that other people have the same traumas that they do. And what happens, it becomes this sense that they're not alone, that we're connected from our adversity. And it's the weirdest thing, but it kind of changes your brain almost in real time. And what happened is when I did the pilot program at Kern Valley State Prison, which is a maximum security prison in California, I wanted to show physically how much trauma we were experiencing within these prison walls, within these 30 men that I was working with. And so we formed a circle, and we would take a step in and take a step out. It was really it wasn't working. And then one day we were like, okay, let's just go all the way. And then what happened is we all kind of started getting into the center of the circle, but our trauma was bringing us together. Like the guy says in the film, it brings us together. And that's what's so important in prison, is you realize you're not alone. And by that act of taking the step and the act of being vulnerable, that's the thing. It's really one of the most vulnerable things you can do is say, my mother used to beat me, or to take a step and, tell someone that you've been sexually abused. That's a very vulnerable thing to do. And some people argue that they shouldn't be that vulnerable. But the thing about being that vulnerable is it opens you up to the community. Suddenly you are vulnerable to the community, and the community embraces you. And that's why we create a safe container. We don't just do the circle. We sit there and we talk about what we've learned. We've talked about what we've experienced, and we're in community, and we're serving and returning, and we're getting in the cortex. We're rewiring the brain in real time. And that's what the circle does. It's actually, I don't know, wouldn't that be fun to have monitors on people while they're taking steps? But that's the key here, is we're showing other people that we've been hurt. And that's one of the hardest things for people in prison to admit, is that they've been hurt.
You had all these big burly guys in the film, and and stepping into the circle. How long did it take you to get them to participate? Because I'm sure it's something, I guess, didn't happen overnight.
Well, that's a really good point. One of the men in the film, his name is Sam Brown, and he was in Honor Yard. He's in the other film. He's kind of the leader in the other film. He gathered all the men and told them that I was cool. So he vouched for me. And so right now, all I have is who I am vouching for the people in Barlinnie, in Edinburgh, in Addywell, and Polmont. I'm vouching for myself, but I promise you, we're going to have probably one of the most fun days you'll ever have if you join us on those circles. But yes, I was vouched for, and but I've gone to other prisons without being vouched for, and people do it anyway. So
great. And what didn't we see in the film? So it's a 5-minute film that I saw, but Fritzi, what didn't we see in that film?
Such a great question. You didn't see the forgiveness circle. You didn't see people stepping out of the circle. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but people step out of the circle to their new possibility. And you didn't see people holding signs. I won't even talk about what that is. And you also didn't see the faces of people after they were leaving and thanking us and saying, "This changed my life. These 2 hours changed my life." And because it lifts the weight of the idea that I'm a bad person, the idea that something is terribly, terribly wrong. You see in the film, we say there is no shame. And what that is all about is about the shame we've carried from our childhood into adulthood, the shame that we've been told, but also the stories that we've created for ourselves that we're bad people. Someone hits you and you must say, well, I must be bad if someone's hitting me. Mm-hmm. I must be bad if they're treating me like this in prison. So remember, these are messages that we're sending, and these messages need to be changed. We need to change the messages. There has to be safety in prisons and fairness, and the messages have to be, you matter, you belong to us, and we're advocates for your transformation. That's the message. And that's the message I say every day, but not just to people in prison, to everyone on this call and everyone in this world. I'm an advocate for all of our transformations, because we have to do it. It's urgent now.
Natalie, what would you like to see come from the conference on the 1st? I know that we're not going to change the world in a day, but what would you like to see being springboarded, if that's the word, from what's going to happen from June?
Okay, what do I want to see? I want to see, for a start, all organisations, all workforces taking a trauma-aware, a trauma-informed and a trauma-responsive approach. I want us to look at the people that we're looking after, whether that be kids in nursery, kids in school, kids in care, kids in young offenders, kids in prison. Are we looking after their needs? Our vision for Cisco is, if you've ever heard of Homeboy Industries and the work that Father Greg Boyle has done, I want us to have the biggest buildings across the High Court in Glasgow, across the Sheriff Court in Glasgow, and I want this space to offer everything for these men leaving prison, because when we talk about trust, right, it takes a community to heal a community. So what I want to do is to create the biggest community within our community, where people, men like Rab, can come and they can attend education. They can go and attend parenting groups. If they want to have a tattoo removed, they can have a tattoo removed if it's gang affiliated. They can then look at skills development. What does that look like? What do I actually want to do with my career? I don't want to just be a labourer because people are saying that's the only opportunity I've got. We want to create something that gives everyone the skill sets. That's what I see. But what do we need to do to get there? Let's do more prevention work from the youngest ages that we possibly can. Because remember, these guys' brain, these male and females' brains were developed by the age of 5. So this is what we're working with, Gary. It doesn't matter if they're 59-year-old men and women. We're working with 5-year-old kids because that's where their brain developed. They weren't loved. They weren't nurtured. People from poverty and disadvantage are 17 times more likely to go to prison. So we need to be taking our work into the most disadvantaged areas and showing people that nobody's ever loved. We'll love you until you love yourself. We'll believe in you until you believe in yourself. And we will stand and walk beside you until you can walk alone.
Lovely. Thank you, Natalie. Ian, what about your thoughts post the 1st of June? What would you like to see happen?
What I would like to happen is really in all areas, so in education and justice and health, that basically we start properly responding. So knowledge is a great thing, but as I say, the work that Natalie does, the work that Fritzi does, the work that James does, and there's lots of other people on the call here who are activists. They are trauma responsive. These are people. I'm not saying we've done with the talking, because we need the education, we need the information, but we need to have the doing. We need to implement things. So in terms of prison change, Fritz is absolutely right. We don't need to wait. Kindness, compassion, empathy, giving people hope, persevering with them when they fall on their arse, all of that costs zero. It doesn't cost anything to change how you are, who you are. You know, there are things that will cost money, but as I say, if you've got less people in prison, that money can be reallocated. The prisons that are involved in this campaign, the prisons that are letting Fritzi come into them, they don't want to have thousands of people in prison. They're actually quite compassionate people. They actually want people to recover. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. And that's why they're letting Fritzi in, because they want to help. We don't want people incarcerated. And those that do, you know, the Trump type people of lock them up and throw away the key, that isn't a solution. I'll steal James's phrase, which is you can't punish traumatized people into a better way of being. And that is a fact. And I've watched that. I watched it for 25 years and didn't understand it. In the last 4 years, I can see it, and I see the difference it makes. I see the difference it makes when you're leaving a client who's leaving the court and saying, look, why don't you maybe go along the road and we'll introduce you to someone at the college? Or what for? Because your life can be better, and they get a bit of hope. It's not overnight. Trauma is not easy. Trauma is not a quick fix, but there's things that we can do, and we can all do it. We can do it right now and change how we are.
Lovely, thank you, Ian. And James, what about you post-conference? What are your hopes? What would you like to see?
I'd like to see the rehabilitation of offenders being put in its proper context. That it's about creating therapeutic environments that heal the autonomic nervous system. That's it. It's as simple as that. That's the challenge.
Wonderful. Wonderful stuff. Fritzi, final word for you. We are obviously very much looking forward to seeing you on the 1st of June in Glasgow. You're obviously fired up for your visit, certainly from the conversation we had on Monday and from what you've said tonight. You're absolutely geared up, and we can't wait for that energy to come across. What would you like to see resulting from your visit?
I would like, first off, to be invited back to all the other prisons in Scotland so we can continue the work there. But I would like to see, of the 50 to 70 to 100 people that we get to work with at each prison, is that they begin their own healing process, and they spread the word about what's possible in their prison, and they spread the word about what's possible to their families, and that we build bridges not only to their own families, but to the communities. And we start really, really bringing our compassionate selves to the world. Mother Teresa's, my favorite quote by Mother Teresa is, if there is no peace, it's because we've forgotten that we belong to each other. And my other favorite quote is, Ram Dass says, it's gonna make me cry. We're all here just to walk each other home. And what I want to do when I come to Scotland is help walk my friends in Addywell, Edinburgh, Barlinnie, and Polmont. I want to help walk them home.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Just a reminder that on the 1st, Suzanne Zeedyk will be talking, and David Abernethy, who's the governor of HMP Edinburgh, will be alongside you as well. And I know that James and Ian will be with us too. So an event we're all really looking forward to, and hopefully it will be as groundbreaking as we want it to be. I've got to say thank you to you all. You've been wonderful. Thank you for your patience. Fritzi, Natalie, James and Ian, thank you ever so much for joining us tonight. God bless, and we'll see you all very soon. Thank you to everybody who's joined us tonight. Take care. Good night.
Fire.